Hello and welcome to Trapped in History. This is episode 76, I believe it is. I've been doing so many of those at this point now. Charles gives me the thumbs up. He's like, "Very good, sir. You messed that up the other day." He's so proud of me, like a proud stepdad.
Even though
So,
you're way
anyways,
younger
even though you're
than
younger, I'd
me.
say even though you're younger than me, but yeah, this is episode 76. We're going to continue our journey, my educational journey. I'm sharing this with people, and Charles North is going to help me on this, and that we are focusing on why primary sources are so damn good. I did an episode a couple ago of my own view. Last episode in 75, we had U.S. or world history, and I'm sorry, European history teacher and AP College Board trainer, Kenneth Lesage on. We did a great hour and a half discussion from his teacher point of view of why they're there. I've asked my buddy Charles North the Sixth to come back on again from Books and Battlefields. I want to make sure I do show our audience again where they can find you. And again, great to have you back, Charles. And just as a reminder of all the different locations, if you can share that with our audience about where they can find you at, because sometimes I don't list all those. But again, first off, it's just great to have you back again.
Well, thanks for having me on, Robbie. I appreciate the invite. It's always a great time being on here, just chatting about history. It's a refresh every time I get to talk to somebody about history. So, especially with where I am at work. But you can find me on like Instagram and more or less like my recent um, readings of where I'm at in the book I'm currently reading. I'm currently reading They Fought Like Demons. It's about women who fought in the Civil War, not
Mhm.
just were nurses and whatnot. You can find me on X, or what I call Twitter still, and the YouTube. I don't have any other social media platforms,
Yeah.
but I do
Well,
appreciate you having me on.
yeah, you're welcome, man. And you can do what I do, just call it Twitter X. That's why I just try to get that in there. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles. I know you had another video coming up here soon. I know I wanted to recommend to viewers, Charles. I watched his video on Jamestown last week, and it was great. If you have a chance to go on his YouTube channel and watch that, it was excellent. I think it was around 23, 24 minutes long, something like that. But could you remind the me and the audience again of your upcoming one? I can't remember if it's about Williamsburg or Yorktown, or if it's a different one. Could you kind of share with us what's coming on your premiere coming up here?
Uh, my premiere is going to be at 6 o'clock on Sunday, April 19th, Eastern Standard Time, and this is actually going to be Revolutionary Yorktown. And what's going to happen is I'm going to follow the story of the Continental Army with the French, the Allied forces. Um, the first time America in a war ever sided with France and became allies against the British, who eventually become our allies in World War II and World War I and all that. But they will lay siege to Cornwallis at Yorktown and eventually win the war. Not necessarily win
Mhm.
a war, but put one of the final nails in the coffin in the Revolutionary War for America to become an independent country.
And I can't wait to watch that. And again, I think it's gonna be just as good, if not better, than your last one. And I recommend for anybody to go watch the vlogs that Charles does. I think I can tell like you're having more and more fun all the time, Charles, with all your videos and and I'm sure you're getting lots of editing practice in. I'm sure you're turning into a
Oh,
little bit of a connoisseur when it comes to the editing stuff. And hopefully that journey is treating you pretty well too. And hey, Charles, since you're
yeah.
on with me, you're the one that recommended me and our viewers to the site. I figure when you're on with me, I really should let you introduce this company because I know you have a closer connection with them. But I know, Charles, you recommended our listeners to Second Time Books Online. I know I did. Last episode, I want to apologize. I think I said secondhand, but I had the website address correct. But I wanted to say, because of Charles, I was able to make that just hilarious post this morning where I was torturing my own students with their AP mock exam. And I held up casually and started reading this book called The History of Torture, which is exactly what they must have felt like they were going through today. It's a very short book from 1964. It was only $10. They sent it right over to me. It only took about 4 days to get to me, and I'm here in Kentucky. But for me, I went through the website after you and I met last time. I looked at it. It's extremely nice. I have no sponsorship with them, but since I just love books so much, if I find something that's pretty cool, I'm going to definitely recommend it to people. But Charles, from your point of view, how why do you recommend them to me and others? And maybe what's sort of your relationship with them in terms of what you use on your channel, because you bring up a lot of books, or at least recommending one book on your vlogs. So I love about your vlogs is because it's not just touring the battlefields, but you also have literature to share with us to just enhance that experience even more.
Yeah, well, I got into cahoots with second time books because before even my YouTube channel, I was going there, purchasing more or less a lot of books on my TBR, and they always had a vast selection of Revolutionary War, Civil War, a lot of Civil War actually, World War One, World War Two books from the whole span of everything. They even go back to ancient times if you're into that, and they do branch off to everything else. But when I first started the channel and I came up with the name Books and Battlefields, I wanted to do some local sort of not advertising, but like um, coercion where I help you, you help
Sort of a
me.
collaboration with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like a
Yeah.
collaboration where I was like, hey, can I take some books, borrow, have them on loan, um, and take them with me and use them as source material for my videos, and in return,
Mhm.
just promote me at the store. And they're like, yeah, you know, they joke sometimes saying that like I keep them in business with how much I spend there.
It's
It's
free
crazy.
advertising, man. It's
Yeah,
great.
exactly. So, and that's how it all started. I got in touch with the owner, Brandon, and him and I have that agreement with everybody. So
Mhm.
I just show up, be like, hey, I'm going to go to Gettysburg. I just need a couple books, and they'll just let me take whatever books. We do the inventory stuff where,
Yeah.
but like it gets a little, whatever. Technical stuff, but I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. And then what I do is, if you ever see on the website or on my videos, I always say, hey, you can get this book at Second Time Books. It is, you know, Second Time Books. You can thanks on loan. You'll hear me talk
Mhm.
about. I have at least a book in every video recently from them. There's sometimes they don't have the book, so I take one out of my personal. But most of the time they have a book. And what I do there is I'll stamp it, or I'll get something, some little memento from where I went. That way, when someone buys that actual book, they get a little something of the experience that I had. Like,
Oh,
okay, well,
nice.
there's a map from
Cool.
Antietam, or there's a map from Monocacy, or what I do is I even get a book and I take it to them, stuff like that. That way, they have that book to be able to, you know, keep everything going.
Yeah.
So,
To me, it's great. It enhances the shared experience. And I can't recall the exact title, but I know in your last video with the Jamestown, especially since I teach Jamestown in my regular and my AP classes, I thought, man, I've never heard of that book you recommended. And I thought that would be an excellent one to maybe pull a passage out of or something like that to use for teaching. So that's one that's on my books to buy list. I must have like a
oh, the
list of 50
Jamestown book.
books. Yeah, the Jamestown one. I can't remember the full title of that. Do you
It
remember the
is
title of the
it's
author?
Jamestown: The Buried Truth by William
Yeah.
Kelso.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down. I gotta
So,
remember that.
you can always just check out the video if you ever forget,
Oh,
because
yeah, exactly, yeah.
I put it in there in my source books.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So, and I'll say in
Well,
the video you can get it there. I actually forgot to say it in the video when I was recording at the time, so you see a
mm.
later clip saying, "Hey," and then it's me shaking, kind of saying it because editing. 'Cause I didn't
Yeah,
use my gimbal
I
because
get
it was
it.
almost dead. But yeah, I mention them in every video that I have a book from them, and then even if I don't, I have their website in my link since I've been collaborating with them.
I'm glad you are. Hopefully, that collaboration continues as you go forward. But hey, let's go ahead and jump into the compelling question of the series. Again, you're my part three of a part 6 or 7 kind of one, and again, you're bringing in your battlefield perspective of the vlogs that you do and the evidence you do and the readings that you do. And I know that when I do a secondary source in-depth look later, I'm sure you have some great references with that, especially with the literature that you have accumulated over the years. But I have no doubt that there are, and I know you've told me at least a few primary source connections that has really meant a lot to you that you wanted to share in that. So let's just dive right into the main question again for you. Why are primary sources, Charles, so damn good?
I think, honestly, the main reason why they're so damn good is that without them, we wouldn't have any kind of story to tell. And to elaborate further is, for starters, you wouldn't have secondary sources. You wouldn't have people questioning. You wouldn't have all these books about a topic or a subject with any factual evidence. I know in some cases people do exaggerate their primary source, such as like memoirs, where they're not necessarily 100% genuine with themselves for the reader, but they give off that kind of way about themselves. But it's up, as you said, it's up to historians to decipher the BS from the truth. And when you have multiple primary sources about any given topic, such as like Gettysburg or mainly the significant battles, in there you're able to be your own judge, jury, and whatnot to be able to come up with the truth. And it's the historian's job to be able to decipher. So without primary sources, we don't have that actual angle to take on any topic at all in human history. So, you know, I know some of them are, through pictures, through books, through even letters, because we know letters are, and testimonies, and I believe I already said photos, but mainly all the primary sources, even just oral history. If I tell you my story, it's not necessarily going to 100% get to you, but I'm still a primary source. And also, I don't know if anyone has said it or has ever said it, but we are our own primary source in life. So, in a sense, everybody's a primary source. Everybody else to us is a secondary source. So, that's a couple ways to look at it, and that's why they're so damn good.
And again, to spiral back to some of the things you mentioned, and I mentioned this on my last episode, I think you would agree with me to an extent, is you brought up the exaggeration that some of them can have. And obviously, yes, that can affect the credibility or uncredibility of a certain document. I also find those exciting, though, because, Charles, I don't know about you, but some of my favorite figures in history were the most flawed people ever. And what I like about one of the recent scholarly articles I read for this podcast series is that we forget about these people that have been dead for a long time, that they were very human in that time. They had a lot of the same idiosyncrasies and insecurities and exaggerating. These people, especially like journals or anything like that, if they're writing in the hopes that maybe someday somebody will read it, hey, sometimes they're going to embellish the truth. They're going to romanticize things, maybe tell idealistic versions of their stories. But I also kind of like the challenge of trying to do that, like trying to, because I don't really want to see a well carved up sort of perfect picture. For me, sort of coming from a humanistic teaching perspective, I like the room for flaws. And in my teaching style, again, like many of teachers that teach AP, there really is this way of, okay, looking for bias and intended audience and the purpose for people doing these things. That's why sometimes some of the most biased materials are one of the more interesting ones to discuss with teenagers and your undergrad students or anybody like that. Because again, to wrap up what I'm trying to say here, I thought this was great that you brought this up about maybe using multiple sources from an event, especially from your perspective of looking on battlefields and different battles, whether it be journals or testimonies. And a lot of the battles that you do, unfortunately, and we don't have any audio and video of that kind of stuff. Imagine how amazing that would be if we had audio and video literally from those time periods on those particular wars. But I think another way that we can look at this, Charles, and I want to see if you agree with this, and maybe me and you could debate for the first time, and that is investigator. Like, do you think to an extent, you and I, history enthusiasts, students, teachers, everybody, people that vlog and whatnot, should we be more of an investigator? We look at these things and we wrestle with them and we try to dive down. And like you said earlier, we question these things. It's okay to do that sort of stuff, not to devalue the primary sources, but I think in order to really understand and take a deeper glimpse into the past, even if it doesn't necessarily bring us closer to the truth, I still think it's important to maybe take an investigative approach. What do you think of that? You think it's fair to make that kind of a claim?
To take an investigative approach?
Yeah.
Always. My history teacher in college, or my history professor in college, always says that, and he taught us that the way to view history is to be able to view it at whatever angle you can take it at, and you go towards it from that angle, and from there you're able to find a narrative, and there's always going to be a narrative to come back at you. And in that sense of the narrative going in and you get the narrative back at you, that's where the argument will happen, because you always have two sides of a story. Actually, technically, as I've always been told, there's three sides. You have the two sides and the truth. And he always said to always investigate that way. It's just like a courtroom. It's just like you're trying to defend and accuse somebody or a group of people of things, depending on what it was. And then you have the jury to decide what the truth is, and the thing is, the truth could be different for one jury compared to a different jury. It's just that whatever it is at that time, whatever angle you take. So if you just make the better compelling argument, then that's the argument that wins in that case,
Good point.
stuff like that.
And depending on what kind of primary sources it is, there's always room for interpretation, right? And I think, Charles, that this is why me and other teachers have often used like tactics in the classroom, like mock trials. So I do mock trial team at my high school. I've done that for about 13 or 14 years. But I've also done it in the classroom, like taking like Martin Luther and putting him on trial, or Galileo on trial, or the Rosenbergs from the Cold War on trial. But having kids wrestle through primary sources that way, and then having to use them like tools or weapons in a debating style way, like a courtroom, and having people analyze that, sometimes just creative ways like that can sort of not romanticize it in a way that like hurt the sources, but say, hey, not only read this and annotate on it, but like use it, like try to use it in a debate. You've seen, I think, some of my social media posts before about like the way I teach is often like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting or group therapy. It looks like we're in a circle, kind of debating with each other, and trying to bring in secondary and primary sources to make those debates more enhanced. I think, enhances your opinion. I like the three sides thing. I didn't even think about that, but what your teacher had said in the past. There's always two sides at least, and there's the truth. I like that. I also like, you said something sort of about almost like a two-way thing, or like a two-way conversation. This is like how I try to teach my students to annotate. And like this book that you saw me get today that I posted online, I finally got one of the books on my bucket list. As so many historians, especially of Civil War buffs like you, have read the whole series. Like, this is going to take me a while, but I write in these books like the way people write in their study Bibles. I know, Charles, you're one of those guys. Oh no, so you are a guy that can preserve those. But for me, those books are meant for me to like write in them like a serial killer. So, but here's the reason why. Okay, this is great, Charles. The reason why I advocate for this is when I read books, to me it's a two-way conversation. I'll question the author. I ask questions about things. I act like shocked or I'm sarcastic or I'll curse at it sometimes. For me, it's just the way I learn is that I have to truly sort of kind of fight with it back and forth to get the sort of stick. And that might be the ADHD, that might be reading comprehension problems that I've had since I was a kid. But that's just the way my style is. But I also completely respect people that don't write in books. So I'm not going to hate on you for that, Charles. But I don't know. I like the idea of the two-way thing. I just didn't know if there's anything that you wanted to rebuttal me on or respond to that before we happen to move on to one of our other questions.
No, that's because that's why it's a two-way street. The only thing I can say is I am only guilty one time of writing in a book because it was already written in.
Oh, okay. You mind if I ask what it was?
For Calls and Comrades by James McPherson, the copy I had,
Nice.
I bought it second-handedly, not at Second Time Books, but off of another website that helps support um, other secondhand bookstores
Yeah.
on bookshop.org. But it was all noted, take it, highlighted stuff. I was like, all right, that's why it was this cheap. So, all right, cool.
Yeah.
So I
And
just
it's all right.
went along writing into it. So that's the only book I've ever written in. So,
Well, I'm proud of it for doing that, man.
yeah, that's
Writing
all
in
you.
those
You
books.
spend your money on it.
Yeah.
That's what's
Yeah, that's
great.
what
You
I always
spend
think
your
is
money
like,
on
hey, I
it.
spent my money on it. Now my
Yep.
daughter or somebody when she's older might get curious and open these books and be like,
And then
what the
she'll
hell is
have
wrong
your
with my
handwriting
dad?
and have your
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah.
And
So I have my
that
handwriting,
again,
but
there is a primary
yeah.
source because
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
showing
You're
your
right.
thoughts.
Yeah. I
So
didn't think about that. Like in a way, you can look at us as individuals. We are a primary source. The things that we put out are the tweets that me and you even do, as throwaway as they seem sometimes. They are a public record if you think about it. Like those would be able to be traceable and things in the future. If me and you ever become famous, which would be, I think, a shock to me if we do. But I'm going to be fully supporting you all the way. Okay, so Charles, if
same
you're
here.
okay with this, man, I thank you, man. I'm going to go ahead and take us into this, especially from your battlefield perspective. Which, like I said, I've only really been to a couple of battlefields before. I've never vlogged, so I am going to be so new and such a novice to a lot of these things. But especially the last couple of years, I know throughout your life, but definitely the last couple of years, you've been pushing it really hard. So I feel like a lot of these questions will be revolved around that. Our first one for our viewers and listeners tonight is when you're walking in a historical battlefield, whether it is Yorktown or Antietam or Gettysburg recently, what makes a diary, a letter, a map, any kind of other primary source that may not be listed, what makes that feel more real in the moment while you're there?
What makes it feel more real in that moment? I think it has to be just the words of the people who went through that moment. It's in time itself. You can have all the imagination you want. What seals a deal is what the people say, what happened. Um, a lot of the times you will get a lot of, you know, people were scared. People were, uh, what's the best word to put it? They had this fervor about them when they see a comrade go down, or as they would say, a brother or something of the sort. Um, or they would see the carnage about them, you know, walking on bloody lane and not even touching the ground because that's how many people were dead between both, however, which direction they were walking. You can't picture that until someone writes about it because they were there. Because when I'm walking a battlefield, none of that's there. None of that carnage is there. It's all been taken back by nature. And the preservationists are the ones who um, set it up to where they try to make the battlefield as close as it was to the battle without the carnage, without the danger. So I've gotten to really dive into my imagination side of my thoughts when I walk a battlefield, and using those sources to envision and imagine what these people will go through and try to have some empathy. So it's really puts you in the moment and gives you a perspective that you try to capture, and you try to tell it a in a way where you're not necessarily embarrassing yourself to not get it right, but making sure you get it right to where you do it justice. So you sit there and you think, because I sit there and think of the hardships that the soldiers went through, and giving it justice is what I firmly believe in, and that's why I use some books for those.
And again, Charles, you know that I tend to be a big philosophy guy too, not just history guy. And I like what you ended on there. And I wanted to ask a small follow up to you. Do you think that there is a responsibility or an element of honor involved in what you and others do? You know, you're taking upon yourselves to go on these battlefields and try to. I like what you said earlier. Is you try to get as close to the realism and the meaningfulness of the battle, but without the carnage part of that stuff. Is there an element of honor in the way that we should not only interpret, but the way we storytell these particular experiences?
Yeah. To honor them is to make sure it's done right, and you always want to do it right. Um, as far as the justice that goes with it, you it's required, and it when I do videos, it's because in a sense I'm preserving and passing that knowledge forward. Uh, so telling the stories, even if it's not sunshine and rainbows, it deserves to be told. It deserves to uh, have some sort of acknowledgement, and it needs a, and as I said, it needs justice within it.
And as you said earlier, it needs empathy. And that's why I really
Yeah,
like that one is trying to convey empathy to viewers, listeners, to students, or other people as well too, while also showing an honor. I also like the reiteration of preservation again too, because I think part of honoring is to preserve not
yeah,
just the physical battlefield, but the storytelling itself. And I like the element of justice. I think justice implies that morality of to do it right, and that's got to be a very difficult um, challenge for influencers and content creators to do is that obviously you're trying to have some element of an entertaining or at least interesting way of doing that. It's kind of like Jared Frederick. You remember the gentleman that you met recently from Real History? When I had him on a year and a half ago, he said there, there's a difference, and I'm paraphrasing this between, of course, doing something entertaining and doing something that's engagement. He said when you're covering something as dark as the Holocaust, and I thought about this too. I'm going to use this as a transition because I think this is a
yeah,
great transition to this question. You brought this up a little bit the last time we were together, and I just thought about this. Is the question is how do primary sources help you see what happened on the ground that now looks quiet and ordinary? And you brought this up. You just came back from Gettysburg. I know you've been there several times, at least in your
yeah,
life. But I would love to talk to you. I think a great example for anybody that's ever toured Gettysburg. I have not been back there since I was 11. It's one of my goals to go back. But I will never forget at 11 years old, standing there and hearing the story about the wheat field. You had mentioned that last episode. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Charles. How can we, as content creators, as historians, how can we and others properly do justice to the storytelling of the wheat field at Gettysburg? Because as you know, the carnage was just so shocking. It's so pretty and beautiful and sort of serene, stoic there now. How do we properly convey empathy and do justice and also make it engaging? I know it's a loaded sort of compound question here, but I would love to know if you're going somewhere as difficult as that place or Antietam Creek or something like that, how do we convey that in a justified way?
To convey that is going to be very hard. It's not an easy task. That's why I'm called Books and Battlefields. I use books to help me with that because some of those stories and some of those it's not even tales, it's just stories upon stories of shared experience at these places where this great carnage took place don't necessarily not get overlooked, but it is watered down only because of the audience. A lot of people I've seen, and a lot of people try to keep it at a certain level of censorship. I'm also guilty of it, but when you are there, when you are at the wheat field, when you are at Bloody Lane, when you are at the cornfield at Antietam, and another one is one of my favorite spots is the mule shoe, the bloody mule shoe, the bloody angle. It has a lot of names for what it is at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and it's one of my probably top 5 places in a battlefield to visit. The bloody mule shoe. It depends on the day. It changes within the top 5, depending on what I'm reading. You have to be as much as you can in those soldiers' shoes. And it can't be watered down when you are there. Because we are at a point where at an age where we don't have to deal with that. We are not fighting one another. We're not fighting our neighbors. We're not fighting our brothers. We need to fill our shoes, or we need to fill the shoes of those who fought there. And you can't do it there, not in those soldiers. And you need to sit there and think why they were there. They weren't just following orders, because we saw desertion rates. And when you're there, it's beautiful and it's quiet and it's serene and all these positive words in the dictionary. On the day that there was carnage, it was the complete opposite. It was a hellscape. It was living hell. And none of us understand it. And hopefully we never will. And when you put yourself in those shoes, you really appreciate where you are today. So when you're there, you do not dumb it down. You do not water it. And that's where you gain the appreciation for it. So being there really gives you that perspective. It's like, for instance, you see a beautiful landscape where nothing's happened, like Banff. I think of Canada sometimes at Banff. I want to go there because it's a beautiful backdrop. Could you just imagine the carnage that could ever take place there? No. But when you're at those places in the battlefield, even Newmarket, it's a beautiful battlefield. When you're at Fort William Henry in a beautiful mountainous landscape, the carnage that went there in the 7 Years' War. Oh gosh. The things that people went through to after they surrendered, before they surrendered, during the siege and the battle. Holy hell. It's gut-wrenching. And that's exactly what you need to feel when you're at these places. If you don't feel that way, you're doing it wrong.
And again, I like it because you think about it, like you said, we empathize to appreciate, and it's scary to think about because the men, the young and old men that had passed away tragically in these particular situations, you got to think. I mean, these people, and I try to convey this to my students. They had their own hopes and aspirations about lives and uncertainties. Me and you have seen many stories in the Civil War, Revolutionary War, where very, very young boys are fighting. It didn't have to be a drummer boy, but people lying about their age and getting in and fighting. People, and again, what's so scary about it, you can kind of close your eyes on these battlefields and think to yourself, is that for some of these men, the last memory they had, like you said, was being injured or killed around a hellscape. Like what was going on was absolute chaos. And that's that last visual timestamp in their consciousness in a way. And to me, that is extremely frightening. And I think that's what gives me so much pause whenever I am able to now go on these battlefields now in the future, being much older now at 42. I think I can appreciate it so much more than when I was 11. I just did not quite understand the gravity as much as, like, as 11-year-old boy could do. I mean, it did hit me strong back then. I remember being leveled by it. This little
That's the
kid
first time I
with a twin brother.
visited Gettysburg. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And again, I think you and I were both 11 when we were there. And I have a twin brother, and for two little ADHD boys, we were stopped in the tracks by the tour guide storytelling, and he was just so incredibly gifted as a storyteller, and he made me feel like you made two 11-year-old little boys, hyperactive, feel as though we were seeing and experiencing these battles. And it was just this beautiful kind of hot July sort of summer day. This is probably a year or two after Gettysburg is filmed. So, lots of people are going because it's even more attention after the TNT, like 3 night series or whatever it was originally on there. And that's kind of what got us to go. My dad had always been interested. And who would have thought that one experience led to my entire career? Like, I never thought I was going to teach. That memory always stuck with me. And I realized, the 18 years I've been a teacher now really started when I was 11, like just going to Gettysburg. So again, I just think that's extremely powerful to kind of share. This next question, Charles, it might be the first one in which you want to share one of your pieces of evidence. I know you said, I think you have three. that you would like to share tonight. But please feel free to share those anytime you want. You don't have to particularly do them on one. But the question we're moving on now for any audio listeners that might not be watching the video is, have you ever, Charles, used a primary source on site, not just a book, unless that book is a primary source, that completely changed how you understood a battle? Or maybe not, I guess you came across on site or found or were handed or shown that really blew you away and really changed how you kind of thought about that particular battle or that part of the battle or that particular unit. I know you really like to follow particular units from New Jersey around, which is awesome that you do that. Has there been any source yet you've come across that's really sort of given you like a new look or epiphany of one of these sort of circumstances?
I would have to say yes, but it wasn't necessarily from a primary source. It was from a secondary source, but the secondary source uses primary sources.
Yep.
So that is a yes to that question. I have technically used a primary source through a secondary source.
Well, you brought it up at the beginning of the show. You made it
Yeah.
clear without primary sources, there are no credible secondary ones. So
Yep.
sure, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Would you mind sharing what that secondary source was?
The secondary source was the brigades in Gettysburg and the New Jersey in the Gettysburg campaign. New Jersey troops in the Gettysburg campaign that I use coming up. Or New Jersey troops in the Civil War even. I use all those 3 books in my Gettysburg videos up and coming that will be eventually edited and put up for premiere. And as I said in the last time I was on here, my reactions to those really were genuine. That will come up in those videos. That was the most recent time that I changed how I understood the battle. So you'll be able to see that eventually. But knowing how hard the soldiers fought in those regiments of New Jersey, it really ticked me off that they didn't receive anything. And then I knew little about what happened at Fort William Henry, and I know some of it was propaganda, but I know also at the same time there's truth and stuff like that of what happened to the people who surrendered to the French and the Native Americans after they surrendered to Fort William Henry at the siege in the 7 Years' War, and what happened with the women and children. Really had a gut punch to me, and it really disturbed me. Really disturbed me. Like I didn't want to read it, but I continued on because of it. So it really changed how, even for future wars and battles, how I understood why people would be the way they were towards certain people, even towards war in general. Because war, I know, brings out the worst in us, and I know sometimes war brings out the best in us. And it was a yin and yang kind of thing. Even though it's never really both sides, you hardly see the same amount of good as bad in a battle.
And you got to think, Charles, like that wisdom you're gaining from these kind of experiences, even if it's jarring or even angering, whenever you see these, it's changing the way that you're learning through these experiences. Because I like your approach to, you're a lifelong learner. Like you work hard, you work multiple jobs, but this is your passion. And I think even though that situation is heartbreaking, especially the New Jersey one that was not recognized, and these other stories, especially when we read these stories that happen to civilians. I've heard Jocko Willick on his podcast had said before that when you make a difficult decision about going to war, you need to understand that when you do that, civilians are going to die. Like you need to take
Yeah.
that very seriously. Anytime that you go with the effort, and I know we're seeing that now with the current Iran war, the continuing Russo-Ukrainian war, the wars over in Southeast Asia, or any other future wars, is that as much as collateral damage has been reduced compared to what we saw in Vietnam and World War II and before that, it's still there though. And it's a gut wrenching thing, but it also gives me appreciation for what I'm studying. And I think that's the point. That's the reason why me and you can never lose the humanistic side of what we're doing. And I think that's where our passion will fade more, is if it just becomes a job to us or becomes another thing that we're doing. Then there's no fervor there. Like you had said earlier, one of the things you like about the battlefield is in reading these people is the type of fervor that they had and attitudes that they had going into these things. If you don't mind, I would love to move on to this other one here. Is someone as your perspective, I always get to thinking about this too, is that as many statues as there are and plaques and storytellings that there are in all the battlefields you've been and the ones that you may go back to, and again, when you walk these battlefields, when you go to the stories, when you hear people who tell these stories or study them, are there any people's stories who at times may feel absent from the storytelling picture? Therefore, in a way, maybe we're not getting still as full of a story of a battle as what we would like, because certain stories are missing, and maybe for good reason. I mean, on topic of primary sources, you know as well as I do, so many have been destroyed, lost over time, and maybe that is the reason. Maybe it's not purposely left out, but you know as well as I do, there's plenty of examples in history where people's stories are left out on purpose because they are suppressed by the victor or by whoever it would be. But I'm just kind of curious from you: have you ever walked a battlefield in the last year or two and thought to yourself, I wonder what it was like for these people, but there's no real evidence or any kind of primary sources that really tells that particular kind of story. Therefore, we're getting not as clear or full of a glimpse as maybe we could.
I think at the moment, the stories I feel absent are the ones that you're not necessarily focused on. In a sense where when I'm at Gettysburg and or I'm at Yorktown, who's the enemy? You have the Federals or the Union versus the Confederates at Gettysburg, or you have the British and the British and the Hessians and the French and the Continentals. Uh, Charlie, who I had come on for a couple episodes, and also in my upcoming Yorktown video, he came on, and he's going to be on for my uh, up and coming Gettysburg video. He told the side of the Confederates with the Georgia Regiment that went against the 8th New Jersey. Because when you're looking at one, or wherever you're at, you're not necessarily looking at a broad perspective. Some of the videos that I do are very narrow. They look at like what took place here, 8th New Jersey against like the 9th, 8th Georgia. And Charlie came in and talked about somebody's experience from one of those Georgia regiments. Can't remember off the top of my head, but when you're there at these battlefields, you are not necessarily have absent the stories of others, But what isn't there are the stories of maybe the guys on your side who helped you or helped that regiment stave off and hold off the enemies around you, or the enemies attacking you, or their enemies on their side. Because you still have however many regiments from however many states next to you fighting the same cause, and you have the same amount against you fighting for their cause. Um, so the ones you leave absent are out of the scope that you're looking in. It's kind of like looking in a magnifying glass, you know, and you're only looking at what you see while everything else around you is either going as planned or falling apart. Because when you finish, and I did that in my first Gettysburg video coming up for day one. I went over to Barlow's Knoll because I don't think many people talk about Barlow's Knoll. So I went and spoke about kind of like what happened over there. I don't think it gets the highlight it deserves because every bit is worthy. It's just that when you're there, you're only thinking about who it is you are thinking about. You know, when you're at Little Round Top, you think about 20th Maine, but you forget about the other regiments that served with them. You know, when you're at Fredericksburg, when you see the same old 20th Maine fight, I learned recently. I had an uncle or a cousin right next to them in the 17th New York go up Marines Heights. I never knew that. So it's whoever it is that you're not thinking about at that time, that's who's absent. And you can never fully get who's not absent. Or you can never fully get who is absent because there's going to be more who's absent than who you're actually focused on. And most people tend to stick to what they know. And then eventually they'll learn more about other regiments. They just need to be willing to learn about others.
Yeah. Yeah, the willingness is important for sure there. And it just shows you also learning the battle and who might be there or left out. It goes beyond being there physically. I'm sure you still study and learn about these battles when you leave. Also, you've mentioned being back on different battlefields multiple times, and I'm sure you're looking for different perspectives, different experiences every time you go. But I like the willingness there. Charles, if you're okay with it, I have an organic question that I want to ask that we didn't plan on that kind of
Sure.
goes off there. Just to kind of do one from the point of view of maybe someone who has a little bit of a critique of primary sources, like especially based off of what you had just said, is if I was someone that's a critic and I were to say, hey, if I can't get the whole story and every perspective of every person or group and regiment that was not there, and I'm not fully getting it in the moment, then why even listen to any part of the story to begin with if I really can't have the whole thing? Like if all we have is a few primary sources, what if a critic says it's not really used to telling any kind of story there because it's so incomplete? Well, what would you say to someone like that that says it's not maybe worth listening to the story if so much of it is missing?
I believe it's because it's going to raise more questions, which means that you're going to want to find the answers to put it more simply. To put it more into a deep diving more answer is say you want to look up, I don't know. For instance, you want to find out why, let's see, the 8th New Jersey were not there for Gettysburg day 1. You can always look back and see, all right, they were still marching to get to Gettysburg on day 1. So that's why they didn't enter the fight day 1. So they ended up day 2 where they were at by the wheat field. And why did they go against Georgia? Why didn't they go against North Carolinians? That this is just spitballing the questions, because you're always going to have questions and then you're always going to have answers. But the problem is you're going to need to find those answers. So when you're at a battlefield or when you're at a spot where history happened, you are forced to ask why. Well, who, what, where, why, when. Right? Those are the 5 major questions to everything. So you have
Again, this
that.
is where that investigative thing comes in, right?
Exactly. So you get part of it. If you're not interested in it, then you never really were interested in it. Because why are you there?
Hmm.
That's my thought. But,
Well,
geez.
unless you're on like a field trip that you're like somehow forced to go on.
Oh, yeah.
You're right though. In most cases, you're there willingly. Sometimes,
Yeah.
younger people, their parents are having them forced to go. And I'm
Yep.
saying, like, you're right. If you're not willingly there, for all you see, maybe is just a field of grass with a wooden fence that looks older. But
Yeah.
it's just like the other day. I'm going to do a vlog pretty soon over at the public library in Russellville. There's a historical placard there. I had no idea there was a Civil War skirmish there, and over 30 men died. There's no other markers there. There's no primary sources. I need to go to the archives in town. And I get to thinking, for most people, I think they just see grass here. For me, I see an area where 30 or more men lost their lives, like 30 souls
Yep.
lost that. So for me, it's like, and again, I think for many people, and I think that's where, it's up to us and others to be able to tell those
Yeah.
stories so meaningfully. See, when I
So,
get this too, is that, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Charles. I
oh,
cut
sorry,
you
sorry,
off.
sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you. You're
No, you're
pretty
good.
much
Go ahead.
flowing. Is just while I still had a train of thought because my memory is not serving me well recently. But um, with the whole story you just said about the plaque, it
Mhm.
doesn't tell the whole story, but you were interested enough to check it out, and there you listened to it or there you read it, and then you gain interest, and you probably have or you will search it up and figure it out for yourself what happened. So that pretty much helps answer
Yeah,
or answers
exactly.
your question. If I give you a little bit, it's like little breadcrumbs, and if you're hungry, you'll eat it. If you're not hungry, you're
Mhm.
gonna go elsewhere. If it's not intriguing, it doesn't necessarily have to be intriguing. You have to have some kind of um, desire to want to learn. So,
Yeah,
as you said with the field trip, if you're not there to learn, you're just going to exist. But you still might retain some of that memory for later. But for the most part, if you're not there to learn or have any interest in it at all, then you're just better off whatevering. And for those who are there, even if it's one person, it's worth it. So I might tell you about the 8th New Jersey and the 8th and 9th Georgia in my video, and then you might look into what else the 8th New Jersey did or the 8th and 9th Georgia did throughout the Civil War. Heck, I got drawn down this rabbit hole right now about Matthew Broderick, learning about his family history, and his one great grandfather was killed outside of Atlanta. And I stumbled upon it. I wasn't even looking for it. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then here I am. I'm like almost an hour into this thing. So I'm like, all right, you have to have
yeah,
that interest. So for most people who are interested in this,
yeah.
they will ask the questions and then they'll go search for the answers. So if you're not asking those questions, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, and sometimes those interests can build off of seemingly unlikely things. For example, when I had Jared on the show in the past, he had brought up about the usefulness of movies, even if the movie's not great. Like The Patriot has a lot of historical inaccuracies in it, but you have to admit the Patriot did bring up some excitement and more attention to the Revolutionary War. Glory, which again, you're kind of referencing Matthew Broderick, grew up. I think Glory came out in '89, and I remember being a kid watching that, and I remember becoming obsessed on looking up Robert Shaw, like Shaw's history, the 54th Massachusetts, right? That was what I remember the unit being. But
Yep.
see, right there, if a movie like that, and like even if it has its own inaccuracies or things like that in any kind of a movie, like the series of Rome, like my Roman history teacher in college hated it, like despised the old series of Rome, but it's also beloved by a lot of fans. And hell, it got people down rabbit holes of studying more Roman Republic or Roman history. But that's the
Exactly.
thing is, if it sparks that curiosity, that's that again a humanistic nature in us. I think that we are meant to be critical thinking, questioning beings, and I think we want to be curious about things. But it's like you said, if you genuinely want to be there, if you genuinely want to tackle things, you will like whatever breadcrumbs you get. So those breadcrumbs could be primary sources, and yes, you're getting a very marginal, minimized look at what something is. But hey, if they let me and you see a little bit through the crack of the window or the door into what the truth is, I think it's worth it. And maybe that document doesn't isn't truthful, but it's still true that it exists from that particular time period. It's giving us a glimpse into a flawed and not flawed person, and that's why another reason why I like how you said that we ourselves are primary sources, and I just really appreciate that a lot. I want to do one more question before we move into you like sharing any that you would like to do. This will be our last sort of philosophical one for the night. And that is there a danger that the sources that we have and the places that we preserve tell a cleaner and more heroic story than reality? I wanted to do this one because, pardon me, is that you mentioned earlier about how we do censor things from time to time, and sometimes for maybe justified reasons about telling things to it. Remember, you and I may have an audience of children that are interested in history. So how do me and you tell a violent battle without going overboard? I don't think it needs to be G-rated like a Disney movie, but also we don't want to do rated R either. So what is the dichotomy there?
I think the danger part of the question is more or less like a vague, more like I say, is there a danger that the sources we have and the places we preserve tell a cleaner or more heroic story than reality? Um, and the reality itself too, or heroic. Those are some key words there that you have in that question, which reasonably so. I remember knowing that war for a minute was like glorified. So that's the heroic story. It was romantified or romanticized. Um, and that's some of the times during war where it was appealing, people would sign up. Um, and
Well, hey, a good reference for that, and I don't know if
yeah,
you read it in school either, was the famous book All Quiet on the Western Front.
I did.
In one of those
I saw
early
the show.
criticisms, oh yeah, and one of those early criticisms was how they were taught and had very romanticized views of the glorification of war. Like before they ever ended up in the trenches, they were singing songs about being home by Christmas. They had painting
Oh,
stories from
that's
people. These young men, no matter what side you were on, but in this case it was Germany, had extremely unrealistic views of what war was going to be like. To die in battle was glory. It was heroic, and it wasn't this dark, gritty, sort of hopeless thing that Eric Remarque actually like implies that, or explicitly says that it is in that particular one. And I think that's what's so great about books like that.
yeah,
That that can kind of let us into a little bit more of what the reality of war was more than like. And people
yeah,
in a romantic era of history are not really sharing those kind of stories. And you are in an era called realism of art, where a lot of that book like that could be released. And that's for me
yeah,
is it can be shocking, but at my age, I want as close to the real thing as I can get. Let me
yeah.
decide if it's too much, if it's too dangerous, but give me the truth. And I'm sorry to To interrupt
That's
you
okay.
again there, Charlie.
That's
It's just
okay.
one of those things that whenever you were giving your answer, it reminded me. And again, I don't want to lose my train of thought after teaching all
That's okay.
day and stuff like that too. But that reminded me of that because good point bringing up the romanticism, the nationalism involved. It's sometimes glorifying or over glorifying of war.
Yeah, but the thing is, for if you've ever looked at it, most wars ever since at least World War II up to, everybody said they'd be home by Christmas. Everybody. Yeah, the war will be done by Christmas, especially at Normandy. The war will be done by Christmas, and then it lasted another, 4 months after that. But even at Manassas in the Civil War, but it's okay to have. You got to pick and choose. You got to know your audience, and if you want to start from the basic level, you kind of have to have a little bit of censorship. But when you're older, you you need to start knowing that it's gory. It's not rainbows and sunshine or sunshine and rainbows. It literally, and for me, I would have to say it depends on more or less the parent, or a parent, or as an adult. If you're taking, like, for instance, I take my daughter to battlefields. She doesn't know the tragedy that took place. At the moment, she sees that um is a beautiful battlefield, or it's a beautiful. She doesn't even know it's a battlefield. She just knows that she knows that she knows it's a battlefield, but she doesn't understand the term. Um and um from there, it is what it is, and eventually she'll learn, my daughter, uh what took place, even though it's her favorite spot. And um the sources we have will eventually get to the surface. We should never, when the time is appropriate, not reveal those sources. Um, the places we preserve should always tell the full story, and it's up to whoever is there to interpret it the way they want to, uh, or at least share the story the way they want to, in a sense where, from a parent perspective, they're there for the adult to take it in. Because I see it this way, because I'm taking my almost 4-year-old. She sees cannons, like, wow, this is cool looking. She doesn't understand what a cannon actually does, you know? But in time, I will tell her, hey, this is a tool of war that inflicted not so nice things to people, and I gradually, when the time is right. So, like, I don't think it's necessarily a danger. I think the danger is whenever that stuff gets redacted from someone like me, the parent. Even if I know about the battle, like, I've read about it, I know what happened, but say I'm just getting into it, the only danger is that censorship happening at the mature level. For instance, I remember things just happened recently with um over in Philadelphia, the slave quarters, the descriptions of what happened there, uh, were taken down and stuff like that, and they were just put back up. That should be up to, like, the parent to be able to tell their child stuff like that. And I'm only coming at this as a parent perspective, because that's the only way we can pass this knowledge down. it comes from adult to child.
Mhm.
That's the only way
And Charles,
that's not
I
the
guess
only
there's
way I
a
see it, but it's like
yeah.
it's how a parent like me who loves history
Mhm.
and wants to preserve it to pass it down to my child. And I'm sure everybody else like that will feel the same or almost feel the same and stuff like that. So that's that. That would be the only danger is if it ever
Okay,
is censored
I
from
agree.
the adult level. But the sources need to stay the same. And the good thing is the sources are there because they are written down. They are distributed and stuff as a sort. It's just us. It is just up to us to pass it along.
Mhm. It's interesting too because you bring up your daughter. I have a almost 2 year old. So eventually, your daughter, my daughter. Man, I think about this sometimes with tour guides, depending on who their intended audience is. Like if they have a group of elementary kids, and then later in the evening they have a group of like seniors.
Yep.
Let's just say, okay, let's go with your logic earlier. So you talked about willingness. Let's just say both kids are willing, they willingly ask on their own accord, hey, what was this used for? What did this do exactly? How did this person die or have a casualty? So you and I as parents, but also like tour guides that are hired and that are educated, this is that art of storytelling comes in again too, because it's like, okay, they are on their own asking me, like at some point your daughter's going to ask you, what is this canon used for? And then you have to decide, okay, to what extent, obviously you're not going to lie to your own kid or lie to the kids that are elementary, but you're going to say, I would assume, Charles, you would agree, what you say to the seniors on the field trip is probably going to be
A
worded
lot
different
different.
than the sixth grade class or the third grade class that's there. And that makes me respect tour guides even more than I've done before because you're not just telling literally the same words and story every time, but who you're telling it to, the style of it changes. And again, I wonder if you think that's challenging for not just me and you, but for those people, because you have to sort of censor it. But how do you do that without not necessarily ruining, but maybe diminishing the importance of that? And that's what I want to make sure I do as a father and as a teacher. And maybe your best advice that you can offer me, Charles, is that how do I do that appropriately, assuming that they are willingly asking me something that's very graphic on their own accord without necessarily ruining the credibility of the story. Or, like we said at the beginning of the show, maybe this is good. We're becoming full circle, and that is without dishonoring, without taking away the empathy part. What would you suggest for me and you as fathers, as teachers, or anything like that?
I would say that, like for instance, if my daughter isn't there yet about what cannons are, what muskets are, what any tool of war that will inflict harm or maim or kill somebody is at. She's not there yet. But I believe depending on where she's at in her maturity, where she's at in age and stuff like that, will determine at that time how I will answer her. If she were to ask me now, like I've done before, I usually just give the typical parent answer where it's like that gives people boo boos, you know, that hurts people, that makes people not feel well, that will make them go to the
No.
hospital, stuff like that. Like,
And
and
again, though, you're not lying. If you think about it, like I
no,
said, you're not being explicit, but
no,
you're obviously
I'm
your
just
message here is don't lie to your children.
no.
But like you
You
can do
you
it in a
don't,
way
but
that
yeah,
you know.
you don't make a sunshine and rainbows, but also you try to give it to them at their level of okay, this thing will make people go to hospital, or this people will make them hurt and cry and you know stuff like that. And as you said with the seniors, you can literally with seniors give them the whole thing. You could be like, dude, canister in this is like a shotgun. It will
Mhm.
hit 20 people and then go through those guys or gals because of the book I'm reading, and maybe hurt, maim another 15 more. And their arms are gonna be off. They'll be bleeding. The feel. You can give them the whole shebang because they're at that age where they should be able to
Yeah.
take that in and understand it.
And again, they're at that age where taking that in may spark a deeper rabbit hole, right? And some of them
Yep.
maybe they go on a journey, and who knows, maybe for some of them they develop a passion like you and I and others do, or the history learning becomes a lifelong process, not just that. Hey, I just thought of something. I know we were going to get to the last segment where you were going to show anything that you wanted to show, but I
Yeah.
started thinking of something. Would you consider? What would you think of this question? Is a battlefield a primary source? Would you consider a physical battlefield that's been preserved? Is that the same as a primary source?
I believe a battlefield is the source.
Okay.
It's the source of. It's not just a primary source. It is a source. It is the focal point of source. It is literally where two primary sources come together.
Yeah, hey, it makes sense. I was just curious about that. I got to thinking, it's like, the bodies are cleaned up, the carnage is cleaned up, Mother Nature has expanded on that sort of thing. Does that do anything to sort of the originality of that place? Obviously, you don't want to just leave those things there for disrespectful people's bodies and families and things like that. But I always just kind of wondered that. So hey, last segment of the night. So we're right around the length of the show that me and you were last time. But I know that
Yeah.
there may be a few sources that you wanted to share physically with the audience. And I wanted to open that up to you. So before we wrap things up, and this would be a wrapping up of episode 76, are there any primary sources that you would like to share with the audience visually? And keep in mind that our audience is also a part of it is an audio only audience, possibly.
Yeah.
So if you can, try to be as descriptive as you would like as you go through these.
So my first primary source, these are all in written form. My first one is going to be the personal memoirs of U.S. Grant or Ulysses S. Grant. I always recommend, always will, always am a champion of Grant's memoirs. If you ever want to have understanding of how he took on the Civil War and the challenges that he faced during such, sure, it's his perspective, but um, I grew a profound understanding and um, great. I don't even know what the word is for it, but I've come to love those memoirs. Uh, the way he wrote them, the way he not necessarily didn't hold back. And I also have to thank Walt Whitman for convincing him. I know he was destitute and broke to hope to raise money for his family when he was broke to write these, but he deservedly so needed to write the memoir, and it it gives a better perspective of the American way of life and his way of thinking during the Civil War and what should follow or hopefully follow afterwards. Um, I always tell people they need to read it, you know, whatever the sort or wherever they're at in their historical um, journey. And then these next two are close to me. My grandfather, who passed long before I was even born, I never knew him. He was 24 when he passed, but he served in the Vietnam War. And his friend, or I would say became his, in a sense, brother, friend of the family. My uncle, because that's what happens in families, is when you're very close to a family, you become a relative regardless of blood. My uncle Dave Cottrell, who was in the Vietnam War, met my grandfather at Fort Dix in New Jersey, and I was able to acquire a questionnaire to ask him about his time during the Vietnam War, and he wrote me I got to see how many pages this is. 26-page answer to that questionnaire, and it involves my grandfather here and my grandmother. His name's Dave Cottrell. He was in Vietnam, and it tells his story from when he got drafted in what looks like 1969. He took the oath of service right in the beginning in January and served his time and met back with my grandfather back in the early 70s before my mother was born. And I can never thank him enough, and sadly he has passed on since then. So I have that with me. And this next one I have here is the man who got me into history. It is a 5-page little story. It's titled Lieutenant Jack's Hill. Sorry, it flopped. This is the first copy I ever came to. My uncle kept it on him. This is of my great-grandfather, Sergeant Donald Lyons of the 90th Division. And he was with the 357th Regiment, and he was in Company G. And this story here goes on from the Carentan Peninsula to St. Lo and the Mets. And it's very brief, but it's the best he did. And this is the only written story I have down of his. And he passed, sadly, in 2008 when I was going to be 15. So I didn't have the wherewithal to ask him all the questions I wanted to. And this is all I had of him. And it tells of his time in the war up to Lieutenant Jack's Hill at Metz, which has some funny anecdotes in it, but it's the only thing I have of his that I wanted to share. And that's why the 90th Division stays very close to my heart. And I have a book on it I gave my cousin. I didn't mind paying the money nor paying the money to have it fixed when I accidentally broke the book.
Hey, nonetheless, though, those are powerful primary sources. The last two there, it really seems like they're more than just sources to you. They're part of your relationship with those two individuals. And I hope they never go away, man. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful, sentimental thing and very easy for you to empathize with because it's family. And I just love the way you look at it. And I'm very honored that you were willing to share those, not just with me, but our audience. That's one on there too. So, Charles, I really appreciate your time. I know me and you have had a long day on our Fridays together too. So we're going to wrap this thing up. Again, all the listeners, thank you for investing your time in us. Charles and I had just a conversation yesterday about the numbers on YouTube going down for certain people. And I know for us, as very early on in our sort of infancy of our channels, I'm very grateful for any of you that invest minutes of your day and your time and your leisure and to be able to listen to us on our separate channels when we're together. So as usual, keep questioning the past in order to understand the present and be contagious. I'll see you on episode 77.